So everybody has had, no matter what their socioeconomic status, high, low, medium, where they live in the world, everybody has had usually quite a few experiences of larger samadhi. They know there is a there. What they don't understand, and what it's really important that people like you and me educate people on, is that these states can be invoked consciously. And when you've hit that mountain peak experience of being one with all that is, this immense, Sigmund Freud called it oceanic bliss within. When you hit that point, why not go back there? And why not go back there, not occasionally, not once a month, not once a year on vacation, but why not go back there every single day?
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and Sifu Taoist Master San Qing. And you know what? I'm still not tired of this. So yes, it's Christmas morning. I go down to the tree and the universe has brought me this incredible being. I am so grateful to welcome to the podcast Dawson Church, who generates and has been spending his lifetime discovering and merging these incredible languages that are between science and spirituality, an awareness that there is this parallel, this awakening that comes with this new language, and all the ancient traditions that are on the path to that have been resonating for thousands of years. And he incorporates his incredible mastery and understanding of these very two languages and presents it to us today. I want to welcome you to the podcast, my friend.
San, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's an exciting time that we can have this conversation where literally we're not using AI to translate Mandarin. We're actually able to take this incredible slither of what within Taoism we call it the diamond, is the consciousness, and it's another facet of the diamond. And I really believe that you have an incredible message and you know mission that's driving you to be able to bring this to people, the world conscious collective. And it's such an incredible insight, because once people hear what you have to say and how you've delved deep into mirroring and identifying the incredible parallel in the messages, people get blown away because it's instant. It's like, holy moly, I'm picking up what he's putting down. So I would love you to share with the audience a little bit, just an abbreviation, because it's a lifetime of incredible exploration of where you started and how you got here.
I started in a pretty uncomfortable and unpromising place as a child. My parents traveled a lot. My father was a missionary, and so we were always going from country to country and area to area several times a year. And I didn't really relate very well to people for a long time, and wound up a very depressed and suicidal teenager. And then one day, when I was 14 years old, I was lying on my bed after school, just in absolute despair. And suddenly I had this vision, and I found myself floating in space, and looking around me, there were all these stars, and the universe was consciousness, and it was love. And that experience was so unlike anything I had had before. And there was nothing in Christianity, which I was then part of, to tell me what was going on. And so I eventually began to study Eastern mysticism. A couple of years later, joined a spiritual community, spent many, many years there in my teenage years, in my 20s, early 30s, and studied the perennial philosophy of Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, all Evelyn Underhill, all the great teachers. And I found that I was getting wiser, a little bit wiser. I was not getting much happier. And the level of dysfunctionality I saw, not only in our community, but in the ashrams I visited, was extraordinary. Just dysfunctional people who sort of fled to an ashram and then hoped they'd get better and didn't. And so that's why we read about all these scandals in these spiritual communities, because there's so much unhealed trauma there. So eventually I began to study psychology. I spent many years in book publishing and mostly in the field of psychology and alternative medicine. And then one day I was at 45 years old in crisis, and I decided to begin meditating every day, not just occasionally, making a slapdash, half-hearted attempt to do it. I said, tomorrow morning, set my alarm clock early, get up before my kids are up. I'm going to meditate tomorrow and the next day, and I'm not going to stop. And that was like, gosh, 25 years ago. And I haven't. No matter how busy I am, no matter what's going on, I meditate. And that was the start of a shift in my life. I then began to notice my money changing, relationships changing, relationship with my children improving. All my health got better. All kinds of things changed within a few weeks. I then began to dig into energy medicine, energy healing, learned acupressure, began to use acupressure tapping at acupressure points for psychological release. And I found that a lot of the misery and a lot of the patterns I'd had since I was a child just went away really, really fast, and began to experience these blissful states. But I also was very into measurement. I wanted to know how you could quantify these states. So I began to form research teams. I called colleagues in universities. We began to do studies initially of PTSD, and I wanted to apply these energy therapies to PTSD. And we did some pilot studies, eventually some full-scale clinical trials, eventually a bunch of biological studies looking at cortisol and stress hormones and immunoglobulin and brain waves and brain function. And we now built up this huge suite of research, and it shows exactly how we change, how our brains change, how our bodies change. And it turns out that human beings have all kinds of potential for expressing love, joy, peace, hope, optimism, all positivity. And there are these brain structures that are there in our heads. In most people, we're not using them very much. And occasionally they have a flash of, like I had when I was 14 years old, and they see the universe, they realize that there's a bigger world out there, but they don't do anything with it. The first study of people who had awakening experiences was done by Father Andrew Greeley in the 1970s, and he found that everyone has them. Hardly anybody does not have an awakening experience at some point, often in their early childhood or their teenage years, but they don't tell anybody. They don't tell their priest, their minister, their rabbi, their father, their friends. There's no place to put these experiences in our society, or there wasn't back then. Now there's more of a place. And so now we're seeing this emergence of millions of people having these experiences. With science, we're measuring what goes on in their hormones, their brains, and what science is letting us do. I have a whole book called Bliss Brain, where I look at all the meditation research through the lens of MRI studies. And I ask which meditation methods are the most powerful in terms of their ability to produce neurological and genetic change. And it turns out there are only a few things that are, but those things are so potent that in one study I did with some very talented colleagues at Bond University on the Gold Coast of Australia, an MRI study, we refined this knowledge, applied it, had people do the special meditation for 22 minutes a day for a month. And in that month, we found massive structural change in their brains. So as we now apply neuroscience to these ancient techniques, we now can distill the most effective ones and get people onto these paths very, very quickly, have them have these awakenings. And so a lot of people are going through this right now. That's just a quick recap of almost 70 years of joy and fun and exploration.
That's amazing. I'm going to pause this for 1 second and move this. Hopefully, I don't like to. I need to make a timestamp for my editor, my wife. I don't look as much like I'm just turning into light. I look at it like from a viewer's perspective, like I can't look at this, and it's not because I'm blinding, but it's like this light element. 850. Yes, when you look at just the discovery that you've had, um, paralleling the science to the ancient practices that you've discovered, I've had it becomes quite an incredible insight to how things are, you know, evolve to what it is that you're experiencing today. So why don't you share a little bit more? How about the brain waves? What have you discovered with the brain waves when people get to a certain state of awareness?
What we found is there's a very unique brainwave pattern, and it was discovered in the 1950s by a British engineer who worked on radar during World War II and was very interested in brainwaves after the war, during the war, and built special EEGs. And the EEG was invented by a German doctor in the late 1920s and developed in the 1930s before World War II. But it was really rejected. People said, invisible energy in the brain, hogwash, off with his head. So the guy didn't last very long, and it was picked up by this radar engineer called Maxwell Cade in the 50s, and he began to hook up masters. He hooked up Taoist masters. He hooked up Native American shamans and healers and indigenous healers. He hooked up Christian faith healers. He hooked up Jewish Kabbalistic mystics. And what he found was that even though their traditions varied wildly, I mean, some of these were monotheistic religions, others were polytheistic, others were, but if you're a Buddhist, basically no God at all. And yet what he found was that when they were in that state, that mystical experience, their brain waves looked exactly the same. And now I've done a lot of research with colleagues over the last 20 or 25 years using these machines, and we can look at a readout of your brain waves, and we can tell exactly where your consciousness is at. We do not need to know how old you are, what spiritual tradition you're in, what language you speak. We can look at your brain waves. They tell us everything about your conscious experience. And what Maxwell Cade discovered in the 50s was this commonality, which he calls the awakened mind. And the awakened mind pattern has a lot of slow waves. So the slow waves of delta and theta, which are present during deep sleep and then dreaming sleep, are there. There's a ton of alpha. So alpha waves in the center of the spectrum expand a lot of alpha waves in the awakened mind. Beta, the thinking mind, the mind that is ordinary consciousness, that shrinks dramatically. So people have some beta. They're still aware, they're still awake. Like when you go to sleep, the beta disappears completely. And the awakened mind isn't like that. Beta shrinks, but it doesn't go away totally. And then there are bursts of this recently discovered wave called gamma. And gamma is the highest frequency wave, and mystics have a lot of it. So we've identified this common brainwave pattern, which Maxwell Cade called the awakened mind. And it's so exciting to see people. You just guide them through a simple meditation. And I remember I had two neuroscience experts at a workshop I was doing in New York a few years back, and I had them hook up. I each hooked up 4 people, and I had them do this simple science-based meditation called eco meditation, and it's all over the web. It's just a simple set of instructions you do to regulate your autonomic nervous system, and we've also shown it decreases cortisol and does all kinds of other good things in your hormones and neurotransmitters. But I remember that when I met during the break after the meditation with these two neuroscientists who had 4 people each hooked up to their devices, they couldn't believe it. They said these people sat there, 8 people, they never meditated before, most of them, and they were showing massive gamma, like they were monks with 10,000 hours of meditation practice. So that's the beauty of science. It shows us how we can reach these elevated states like the awakened mind, and we can do it not after 10,000 hours or going to a monastery or taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but just sitting there and doing some science-based interventions, breathing rhythms, relaxing certain muscles, having certain visualizations, do evidence-based techniques, and you're in ecstasy within a few moments. And once you've hit that, another friend of mine who did it said, before I did this, meditation for me was like wandering around a dark city at night with all the street lights off and all the road signs down. Signs down. I was wandering around trying to find that good feeling space. When I did the evidence-based stuff that you recommend, it was like the lights were all on, the street signs were all up. I could go straight to my destination, and once I had that experience one time, I could do it again and again and again. And so we found that people, if they do this for 30 days, they are highly unlikely to ever stop in their lives because it just feels so good in your body to be reaching that state of bliss.
Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. I kind of did a lot of like testing for the offering that I created, the digital Taoist offering. And my normal state when I operate channeling my teachers, and I've been doing this a long time, is normally, 100 hertz. And, if I had more equipment going up to 400 and above, that's where I'm at. So for all the layman's out there, that's the gamma brainwave frequency. And what I examine and I'm an observer of during that state is not only just pure source transmission from Lao-Tzu giving me, profound insight to insane things, and I sort of get a micro dose of that throughout the course of the day. But if I focus my attention on just a direct transmission where he takes over my whole physical body, it's a whole nother deal. But when I'm in the presence of healing, that's what happens. That's the gamma. So when I watch, a physical healing, which would be the lowest of transformation, right? But it comes in that form, and the brainwave stays between that. It won't go any lower than 40, which is sort of like the threshold of where gamma starts.
That's right.
And so and when I talk physical healing, I'm talking watching flesh fused back before your very eyes, wiggle and shift and change back to its default state. And so this is kind of like a profound realization for most people. You, my friend, that charge you're having up your spine right now gives you a great indication that, holy crap, he's not lying. I had a sight, and that charge you're getting right now, it's like a visceral charge. Now, how do I know this? I can see it. This is another thing. And of course, feel what's going on. So you get to a sense of awareness, a sensory perception, and I find a blanket statement, all this stuff. And when you speak my language, I get super excited because these are the types of things that take place when you are there. And so what Doss is saying is the mirroring effect of being present in a visceral experience, like an entrainment and neurological synapses that is developing and changing the information energy highways of your brain, is a great example of that. So you want to, and I'm an advocate of this, if you're putting in any investment of time into your spiritual awakening, your time spent, a moment of stillness, however you want to perceive it, you should be able to measure the results. And so whenever I have someone engage in any practice that I train them in, even the app that I developed, you can measure it immediately within the first time you do it, and you will instantly get a result and go, hang on a second, I invested 27 minutes and I can alter my state. Now, I don't recommend it. It would be negligent of me to say this, but I always say to people, go out after you've done it for the first time and create conflict. And they're like, really? No, I'm just kidding. But if you move into a state that is beyond what you believe is your homeostasis, which most people get into that state, they take a nap, they take a training, a meditation, they go, oh, I'm so relaxed. And I walk outside of my meditation room and my kid runs up to me and says, Daddy, I pooped my pants. Oh my goodness. Their whole world unravels. It's not in the spiritual alignment that they were just so blissfully echoing this state of awareness. And the truth is it's the now. And like you and I are sharing this amplitude right now. And this resonance is what you speak of that's so powerful. And I get super excited because it's transformative. What I find with a lot of people is they start this experience, whether it's yours or mine. From me, I have set a certain sort of like framework within the ancient practices. So it's a deeper, when I talk about a healing, you can't measure it in the electromagnetic spectrum that we speak of. It's up there to a state we call chi, prana, God, universe, which goes beyond the gamma brainwave. We're talking about like the now of healing. Some scientists might call it the 0 point, the scalar wave. No, it's beyond scalar wave. It's not, it's instantaneous. You need to be able to see it. This is the evidence-based stuff we speak of. I want to sit, show me. And people are like, what? I'm a show me guy. I'm obsessed and trapped. My personality's trapped in the 80s. So I'll do the Pepsi challenge with anyone when it comes to this stuff. And it's really important because what you speak of is so important for the individual's journey. Is the stuff that you're doing is absolutely critical to the conscious collective and showing people, because the skepticism, the framework of the human mind before otherwise noted is going to be limited. It's going to have a perception where that's not possible. I've been trained. My genes tell me over many generations, over many lifetimes, my ancestors have trained me to believe this. And that's why words are so visceral. That's why scripture is so powerful, because they're deep within the DNA strand, words, numbers, letters, symbols, and you gravitate to them like this unknowing sort of like, why I'm being controlled. Why do I feel this pull that draws me to this very moment? Because it's within you. And I think that would be something I'd love you to share with the audience a little bit more about that and how that relates to your discovery in this healing state.
Yeah, so what I've been doing recently is I have been looking at the research on people who've had awakening experiences. And again, there are lots of them. In the Upanishads, the Hindu scriptures, it says only once in 1,000 years does one soul awaken. And the Eastern scriptures present awakening as a very, very rare and unusual thing. There's only one Buddha 2,000 years ago, and no one since then, and perhaps a few enlightened people along the way. They present in Christianity as well. I mean, there aren't a lot of Jesuses and Moses running around supposedly since that time, and yet what we're finding is that these states are accessible and that most people have at least some sense of that. And I really find the classifications of Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras of the state he calls samadhi, bliss, single-pointed, focused, inward-flowing mind, to be a really useful explanatory framework. And so what we find is that virtually everybody has had that initial experience like I had at the age of 14. Even if you don't meditate, even if you don't believe in God, even if you put aside no time for spirituality in your life whatsoever, you may have stood and looked over a mountainside and witnessed a beautiful valley and been moved by nature. You may have walked on the beach and felt the sand squishing between your toes, and suddenly you're aware of the majesty of this universe we live in. Or you may have been in the arms of a lover, or you may have cradled a newborn baby, or all of us have had these experiences. And in that framework, that's called Laja, L-A-J-A, Laja Samadhi. So everybody has had, no matter what their socioeconomic status, high, low, medium, where they live in the world, everybody has had usually quite a few experiences of Laja Samadhi. They know there is a there. What they don't understand, and what it's really important that people like you and me educate people on, is that these states can be invoked consciously. And when you've hit that mountain peak experience of feeling one with all that is, this immense, Sigmund Freud called it oceanic bliss within. When you hit that point, why not go back there? And why not go back there, not occasionally, not once a month, not once a year on vacation, but why not go back there every single day? And that's when the wise person says, okay, I'm going to do what it takes to get there every day. And the fastest route there is any evidence-based form of meditation. And there are lots of different styles of meditation. The Max Planck Institute in Germany breaks meditation down into 4 styles. In my book, Bliss Brain, I break meditation down into 7 different kinds of meditation. The Max Planck divisions are a little too much in the head. And they leave out all body meditations, but yoga is meditation, Buddhist walking meditation, Qigong, Tai Chi. These are all meditations that are physically based. So if you look at Bliss Brain, it'll talk about the 7 styles of meditation. And I recommend people experiment with all 7 of them and find one that works for you, what works with your lifestyle and your family and your body and your temperament. And then you pick one, but then do pick one and then do it regularly. Make that commitment to doing it every single day for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And you're going to find your life starts to change, because now you aren't you aren't entering samadhi occasionally, accidentally, when you're standing on the beach. You're entering samadhi every day. You're feeling one with the all that is. Eventually you enter a non-dual state where you fall away. The old you, the personality you were, seems profoundly uninteresting to you, because you're far more involved in the I that is the one consciousness that is present throughout the entire universe. In my book, Mind to Matter, I talk about manifestation and the 4 fundamental laws of physics. There are 4 fundamental forces in physics. And despite the search for a unified theory, there's never been one that's been universally accepted. But what I present in Mind to Matter is that if you look at all 4 forces of physics, we find that they are all affected by consciousness. And there is experimental evidence that every single one of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe is affected by consciousness. And in one study where a friend of mine called Bill Bankston was the subject, he was doing healing on mice in a cage. These mice had cancer. He was doing hands-on healing with them in a cage in a university laboratory. And in another building on the same campus, there was another batch of mice, and they weren't getting any healing from Bill. Bill was healing them at random intervals. And what would happen is that a little beep would go off in his pager, totally at random. He'd dash over to the university and do a healing session with the mice for about 20 minutes. And then, maybe a second session that day, maybe not a session for 4 or 5 days, totally random when Bill was doing the healing on the mice in that room. And again, the control mice were in a different room. And what the researchers were measuring was the electromagnetic field in that room. Now, the electromagnetic field is supposed to be completely independent of human activity or consciousness. What happened during the random moments when Bill was doing the healing is the electromagnetic frequency in that room changed by occasionally up to 22%. Often it was nudging the 20s, was varying between 15 and 22%, changing one of the fundamental laws of physics, and it was not happening in the other building with the other mice on the same university campus. So consciousness, healing, energy, these things are profoundly able to shift our worlds. And when you start to invoke these stages of non-duality, when you drop your personality, when you merge with the all that is, and you make that a practice over and over and over again, your material reality starts to change. Your resonant frequency starts to change. You start to have more of that gamma brainwave you were mentioning earlier, much more alpha, a lot less frantic, busy beta waves, better sleep, deeper sleep in theta and delta. Theta and delta also very active in intuition. So we see a lot of activity in those bands when people are highly intuitive. So this begins to shift the whole reality around you as well. Initially, it's inside of you. It feels wonderful to be in samadhi, but after a while, the samadhi starts to become infectious and infect everyone around you. So that's where you get to in time.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, what I've observed when channeling direct source healing, physical healing, the gamma just goes through the roof. When I'm teaching someone mediumship, which would be more like you're having a conversation, an interview with an entity, a spirit, a epiphany of intuition that might be visceral from a lower transmission. So, ideomotor response, where someone is like using themselves as a tuning fork, which is really all these things, you know, in a blanket of everything is the same. You just start to go, well, I'm having an out-of-body experience. It's not, but I need to remind people that this is the tuning fork. You still have a validation of going, well, I felt this and this happened and that happened and the sky opened up and I was flying with Peter Pan and I felt it just through my whole, you know, state. It's still being registered and it's being accumulated within this anchor, but the realization of, you know, the mother, the oneness, the all, the present moment, which really is all that is when you tune to that, you know, there's very low, like with mediumship, it's like that's a very low brain activity. And so you will have that low brain wave that Dawson's talking about, which is the theta, the alpha, epsilon. You know, what I've found is people can go from one extreme to another and create either gamma or epsilon and still have the healing effect. And people are like, whoa, it's like, it's dramatic, but it's tangible. It's palpable and it's evidence-based. When I say evidence-based, I'm talking about, you know, I might have been a little spoiled 30 years ago when I first came across this stuff, because the first thing I experienced was a physical healing where gangrenous flesh turned back to pink in its color in 40 minutes. Wow. So I've seen it. I've seen bones fuse. I used to really have a hobby of bursting, like, you know, sebaceous cysts, raising them to the surface of the skin, running energy through them. They would open up, explode, and then seal back up again. I've seen it all. And so when you bring anything to me, I'm like, I want to embody it. I don't believe that there is a limit. My belief system is there is nothing that cannot be accessed. And it's just a matter of finding that resonance for it to be realized. And that's where people get totally blown away, where, you know, like using your methods or my methods, like for mine, people are like, I did this once and I had a physical healing. I had this ailment that I had for 20 years. In 5 seconds, it's gone. And then all of a sudden, you know, something else happened. Like I had this conversation with a dear friend of mine, Tom Campbell, who's sort of from the Monroe Institute, has a history of out-of-body experience. And we had this sort of interesting coffee table talk about, you know, I get a lot of people coming to me, you're that guy that can tune in. I've got my grandma, she's in critical condition, she's in a coma, she's going to die. And I'll be like, oh no, that's not going to happen. I think you blew out the connection, my friend, with your energy. I'm starting to think that I'm going.
The last thing we got was the grandma story, where you're saying that, and if you did finish it just before you dropped out, and so you're saying that my grandma's terminal, she's and then she's gonna die, and then right then the screen went dark. So you finished that piece, and you should be able to edit in the next.
Yeah. So the physical stuff is something that I'm very familiar with, and it's like the lower said stuff. But like, yeah, that's a normal. And Tom has had many similar experiences, but it's not uncommon. You know, his theory is the large consciousness system, right? So the probabilities change with your attention intention, and that's how he applies it. Even though he's a former NASA physicist, he's all intuitive. Like the dude is not like left brain. He had to beat himself into thinking like that. It's like he literally, his own admission and confession that I had to literally beat myself into accepting this left brain sort of processes. And so, you know, that intervention or resonance I've seen so many times it's not even funny. Grandma comes out of a coma, vitals are regulated. The doctor goes, "What the hell what is going on here?" And this is just, this is what I've sort of like grown to be accustomed to, and I'm not taking it for granted because every day I wake up as if it's the first time I've experienced this. But I will say that the more and more people that resonate, and I attribute it to the way that I train people, they tune into the frequency, and then they obtain the same frequency right back to how would we summarize that and validate it within a neuro sort of plasticity way? Well, your mirror neurons, it's like the 4-minute mile. Once someone's done it and they go, "Oh, if he can do it, I can do it." Boom. And I feel like that's a really big messaging. What are your thoughts on that?
I think people are waking up all over the world in an unprecedented numbers in an unprecedented way. And one of the interesting bits of data here comes from the Centers for Disease Control in the US, which measures a lot of metrics about the US population. And there are similar organizations in most developed countries. And what they show is that meditation is increasing. And when I was writing Mind to Matter, I really wanted to find out how many people are meditators as a proportion of the global population. And there was data going back to the 1970s. And so around the late 70s, about 1% of the population was meditating globally, as far as I could tell, in countries that tracked such things. What was really interesting, though, was I then said, okay, 1% in 1980, what can we calculate the number of people meditating or having some kind of spiritual practice going back in time? And it turned out that there are records. There are records from India, from China, from England, from France, from Germany, going back about 1,000 years. And those indicate that in every single country, about 1% of people were involved in some kind of spiritual practice going back 1,000 years. So this number of 1% has been constant, as far as we can tell, for at least 1,000 years of human history, and maybe much earlier. By 2005, it had risen to 4%. It had quadrupled in just that 25-year period. Today, it's hitting about 20%. So a 20-fold increase in people having a spiritual practice, meditating, calming themselves, having some kind of samadhi experience, a 20-fold increase. And we know now that this is not an experience only, it is a physiological change, that the circuits in their brain are changing. And as they fire those neurons together, they're wiring those neurons together. And so we see that, for example, the number of people thriving is increasing. In the latest global poll by the Gallup organization, Global Happiness Poll, those numbers make very interesting reading. What countries are the happiest countries? What percentage of people are happy in the world? And what those numbers tell us globally is that across countries, when people are asked to rate their happiness on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being as happy as I could possibly be, 0 being as miserable as my life could possibly get, about 20% of people rate themselves at a 0. Now, think about that. 1 out of 5 people says, my life could not get any worse. It's just so unfortunate that they're living in hell. They're living in a hellscape of that awareness of the world. About 20% of people, 1 in 5, say they're at a 10 or right up there at the top of the scale. Now, think about that number, that about 1/5 of people in the world are having a peak experience, they're living in heaven. 1/5 of people are living in hell. The rest are somewhere in between. And they're living in the same world. We're eating the same food, we're dressing in the same clothes, we're experiencing the same global events, we're reading the same news. And yet, for 1/5 of people, they're saying, we're in heaven, we're having this extraordinary experience, we're feeling one with the universe, we're in samadhi. And then 1/5 of people are living in hell, even though they are living in exactly the same environment. as the people who are living in heaven. So heaven and hell isn't the afterlife. Heaven and hell is right now. Heaven and hell is basically your consciousness. And everyone, even those people living in hell, they've had that larger samadhi. And what my work is all about, and there are just millions of people whose work this is involved with this, is saying to people, hey, just give it that 15, 30 minutes every morning and meditate. Bring yourself into samadhi deliberately every day. When you do that, when you fire those neurons every single day, you wire them together. And as they wire together, they become structures in your brain. They aren't just experiences, they're literal neurological matter. You've gone from mind to matter. You've literally created neural pathways in your brain by the activity of your mind. And our consciousness is so incredibly powerful. I mentioned electromagnetism and Bill Bankston earlier, how in the healing moment with those mice in the cage, the electromagnetism, one of the four fundamental forces of physics, changed dramatically just as his consciousness shifted. You, every single person listening today, every single person on earth has that exact same ability, just that most of us aren't using it. So my strong recommendation is be one of those people living in heaven and do what it takes to get yourself there every day. It's not that hard. Meditation techniques, apps, schools are all over the place, all over the web. The research is really clear as to what's effective. Make sure you use an effective, evidence-based method, and then move yourself to that state, start to fire those neurons, wire them together, change your brain, and then that heavenly experience begins to, after a while, not be an occasional experience, but an everyday one. And so your child does run up to you and say, I pooped my pants after you finish meditation, and you're still in samadhi. You're in samadhi as you change the poopy diaper. You're in samadhi as you read about the chaos on the news. You're in samadhi as you get demoted in your job, or you lose your job, or you lose your house, or you have a financial reverse, or your health goes downhill. You are just in this constant state of samadhi. It is definitely affecting everything around you in a very positive way. But, we live in a big world, and there are global events, and they affect us all. So that tsunami that sweeps through that area that you live in is not going to bypass your house. I know this because I lost my house in a bushfire, wildfire, 7 years ago. Just suddenly, 1 minute we had a house, the next minute our house and our office was just wiped off the map, along with 5,000 other houses in a fire. So, the fire didn't, because I've meditated, did not skirt my house. But you find yourself in the same world, and yet you have this resilience. That's why the subtitle of Bliss Brain, my book Bliss Brain, is remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy. Those are what we find are characteristic of people who do this. They're highly resilient. The tsunami still strikes, the recession still comes, the bushfire still tears through, and you're just a resilient human being. You aren't going to get dragged down into PTSD and traumatic stress. You have the resilience to meet those stressors and to actually use them for your personal growth. Creativity. These people are highly creative. They make music, they make art, they make love, they make creations, they do creative ideas. They're incredibly creative when they're in that awakened mind consciousness. And they're amazingly happy. They're so happy that, for example, that gamma wave, which is characteristic of happiness, in some of the Tibetan monks that we've studied, we found that their gamma goes up 7 times normal. Okay, 7 times what normal happiness is. In Sanskrit, they have words for that. There are no words in English language for the ecstatic states you reach when you're in that state of massive gamma. So go there, be there, let it change your brain, spend more time there, and then even when you do have the kid with the poopy diaper, you're still basically floating around in samadhi, and everything is fine, and you have a very, very different life. You have very different health, very different lifespan. Everything changes when you make that commitment to that daily practice of these states.
And what are your so we're talking about the training in training. So within Taoism, we use internal alchemy, Nidan, Nigong, and we create this infrastructure that is palpable, just as you speak on it, like the synapses, you're creating information energy highways within your brain, within your physiology. And that's where the alchemical process comes in for Taoists, and has been for thousands of years. And, when I start showing people this sort of process, or, just using my app, it becomes instantaneous. Like, you can walk away after a 9-week experience. And I tell people, you spend 2 months using this app, and you walk away with a mastery for a lifetime. It doesn't leave you. So all of a sudden you have mastered your emotions, because that's the big thing. Your emotions don't control you. You control your emotions. So people are like, that sounds that's not possible. Oh, yes, it is. And when you realize that you are the observer, and you can take your personality. I like Netflix, chocolate ice cream, and driving side by sides in the desert at 100 miles an hour. That does not have anything to do with the state of consciousness. And you can take your personality and move it aside. And what I tend to find is, the more you master this, and I really love the way you say that, it's like, put the time and invest into your own cultivation, you will see a result. And it will be an evidence-based result, and it will be on a daily basis, and you will be the barometer for that, and it will speak to you in your own experience, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. It will present itself. And so the observer aspect, and being able to move things like an icon, is how I teach people. You're looking at a computer screen, and you can move things over. You can tell your personality to sit in the corner of the room, roll over, play dead. These are emotional states, right? So you've definitely stressed on something that I find interesting, which is the trauma that you speak of. You speak of the trauma and what that really means to the individual. And for someone who's sort of green behind the ears, and they move into this, like, I want it. And then all of a sudden they get a supercharge. Now, a lot of these old ancient practices, some people would, parallel a little bit more of the Rosicrucian stuff to Taoism. Not even still, I'm biased. Being a Taoist priest, I'm biased. The alchemical processes, in my opinion, is second to none. And when you get the real stuff, the hair curls at the back of your neck, and you start floating and doing all these superhuman things that you don't think are possible, but are very possible. And, when it comes to Kundalini, do you use that as a term of energetic awakening? Would you use the word Kundalini, or just energetic opening?
It's used in the Yoga Sutras, and there is this life force that they talk about that awakens in you as you enter these states. And they don't do it for awakening those energies per se. They see those more as a side effect of meditation and entering these states of consciousness. So their focus is very much on the non-dual experience and letting that dissolve. Initially, in Patanjali, what's called lower samadhi, in the 4 stages of lower samadhi, you're doing this consciously. So what I'm recommending to everybody is that we set aside conscious time for practice every day. And again, there are a lot of different things you can do, but having that intention, setting aside that time, taking that act and active action is going to help shift you. So you're shifting yourself every day, and then you're going to be doing that deliberately initially. There's one teacher who talks about effortless mindfulness, but if you read Ramana Maharshi, the great non-dualist teacher of the 1920s, he says, effortless mindfulness is possible, but it takes a lot of effort to get there. So initially you're taking the effort to do that. What happens though in the Yoga Sutras is eventually, after the effort, after deliberate practice for a while, you do enter a phase of effortlessness. And they say that divine grace just descends when you're ready and when you put yourself in that position. And then that effort gets wiped away. In fact, they say at that stage of your spiritual development, effort actually gets in the way. Effort actually obstructs your progress. So total surrender is required at that point. And that's when you start to move into what's called upper samadhi, where you are not trying to do it. Like I don't try and meditate every day. I don't go and sit there in front of my fireplace and my special place and try and go anywhere. I just sit there and surrender. And then you just very naturally drift up into these states of samadhi. And then things happen in your body. So that energy rises, energy changes, energy between you the people changes, all kinds of shifts happen in your body, in your environment, and these are byproducts of that oneness. You are moving into that oneness with consciousness itself. You are drifting in this space that the mystics, whether they're Eastern or Western, call the void. You mentioned earlier before we were live, you talked about the silence, the great silence. And that is the place that all the mystics refer to, that eventually you go to in that state of upper samadhi. You're in this state of pure consciousness, and you're there. And then as you're there, all these things start to happen. And that Kundalini experience is one of those where the energy starts to be called up from your body and then move up the back of your body usually. And there are different exercises to do the front of your body, back of your body. There are also exercises in the Yoga Sutras to do with the center of the earth. It's a very grounded practice where you are grounding your body in the planet as well. And so your eventual state isn't a disembodied one. One of the most recent studies I did was I was really curious what happened to people's productivity at work and at home when they enter these states regularly. I said, do they become so lost in the clouds of oneness, elevated experiences, that they're no earthly use to the world? They can't deal with their families and money and work and jobs and team members and conflict and all those things. And it was exactly the opposite. We found that after 30 days of entering these states, again, for about 20 minutes every day, that people were 20% more productive at their jobs than they had been before. So now not only are you entering elevated states, when you leave those elevated states and go deal with a poopy diaper and deal with a teammate who's upset and deal with a client situation that's gone off the rails and deal with the news in the world, you are a highly competent human being. And you're also creating a better world around you. We also found, tracked them over 6 months, and the effect increased after that. So again, they were getting the equivalent of about 1 extra day a week of time in terms of extra productivity. So when people say, I don't have time to meditate, I say, after 30 days, you get 1 extra day a week to play, to work, to create, to do whatever you want. You can't afford the time not to meditate. You are cheating yourself of an extra day a week by failing to meditate. So the payoff is there, not just in terms of entering these elevated states of samadhi. The payoff is there as well in being a competent person, loving life, being a really contributing member of society, making a difference in the lives of those around you. And you just start to find, again, these inner states are expressing around you in a powerful way. And the world around you starts to shift, not just the world, your inner world, but your outer world. When you're with one of these masters, you feel it. You can see the radiance pouring out from them. And that radiance is having an effect in the outer world as well, a measurable one.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. Within Taoism, we sort of start with the seed of the instant realization that, we don't start with the head by any stretch of the imagination. People tend to get, when I always tell people, if you're thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. So if you come from biology, psychology, numerology, physiology, you're limited. There must be a much broader spectrum. Science as a language is beautiful. As an absolute is very limited, because
just a way, it's a yardstick. It's just a ruler. It's a way of measuring things.
And I mean, the parallels are, we call it effortless action, Wu Wei. It's between the breath in and the breath out. It's called the Wu Ji, and that you access the mother of all things, the Tao. And so that becomes quite evident, and it's self-evident because it's a physicality thing. So you get a visceral, just like, the building of energy between the two of us right now, the feeling of that amplitude, that comes with understanding that you're just at a state of this present moment, and that energetic welcoming. And it, just for the audience, OG students, as I welcome the energy into the space, it becomes more expansive. And it's like, how is that possible? Because I'm already resonating there, my friend, and I'm just opening a gap up, and it starts to become more visceral. It becomes more kinesthetic. You're getting a registered response from that going, hang on a second, but I put up my angels, and I put my protection, and I did all this. Listen, you are me, I am you. All is one. What are you afraid of? And that's kind of like the probably the path of dualism, that the dualistic perception that is the framework of someone's discontent within this realm, because they start there and I want to be a healer. I feel energy. I got this system. I did a crash course on this energy system over the weekend. I start healing people, and they get in and like, I'm moving it. I'm feeling it. And see, when it comes to the Kundalini, I've only ever seen 2 people in my lifetime that actually have had Kundalini awakenings. Most of this energetic stuff, and I'm not dismissing it for people, is an energetic experience. But to access what we call Kundalini and its true nature is a mastery. And those 2 people could levitate, stop their heart, do a bunch of things that are a progressive development. So I think a lot of people tend to just go, well, it's all the same. Well, actually, no. Like you will get levels of development through these energetic processes that will be self-evident. You'll see results. Whether I stand here and envelop my arm with an anesthesia, drive a skewer through it, pull it out, and you don't see an entry or exit point, which I do for fun, is just an example of what state you're in, right? And so these energetic potential is limitless. I always tell people, how many senses are there, Jeffu? And I'm like, how limited is your imagination? That's where it starts and ends. And so I think it's really important to have a processes, but don't get all caught up in this is your absolute truth to realize your result, because it will be evident by you. And you will gravitate to something, and it will have such a somatic response that you are. There's no denying your validation of where you are. Whether it's a meditation, scripture, an exercise, a workshop, a retreat, a belief system, all these things sort of come together, and they become your realization of what is the truth. And I think that's where a lot of people go, I think I'm Taoist. Well, whatever you are, you're there, and you will find that for yourself through your journey and through this samadhi experience that Dawson's talking about. It's like you want to stay there, and it's not dismissing your physicality, but the effects of being in a non-dualistic, non-centrist sort of like point. Even though that is where you're going into the center of the center of the center. That's when it's between the breath in and the breath out. So it's like, hang on, that's counterintuitive, and you're talking out 2 sides of your mouth. Sifu, what are you talking about? Well, the realization of it is, it all has to do with what is making you contract or expand. And it's like, what? Yeah. Like, if I say something like, let's go for a run on the beach and then have a chicken dinner after we finish, and you're like, ooh, I don't like that. That doesn't work for me. There's a level of discernment and affirming of what it is you're experiencing that needs to sort of be ironed out when you have a starting point, because you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. So what does that mean? It means that you will start with your perception of reality. Is it the absolute truth? That's your truth, and your truth is the only truth you need to be concerned with. So you start there, and then, we have a progression within Taoism. We start with love, and then it goes to gratitude, and then it goes to accepting all things. And people are like, what? Love is the ultimate. Well, quite frankly, most people start off with a hallmark version of that, which could be, razor blades and bunny rabbits to one person, unicorns and rainbows to another. And when you resonate high enough, which we're speaking of that state, you will know. You will just be like, it's the effortless action we speak of, the Wu way. It just is your default or realized programming, which it is, a programming, a state of awareness. You're remembering who you are because you've been there before. And then all of a sudden, epiphany. All of a sudden, hang on a second, I walk into a room, and that type of resonance will result in two things. People gravitate to you or they're repelled by you, only because they're operating in the duality. And, if you're in a state of like, a mastered weekend where I got 1,000 people together for a group healing, you're going to be in the same state. Everyone's coming together for whatever it is, and their stuff, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, will dissipate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is. The group effect is powerful, and the one of those interesting studies is called the Finders study by a dear friend of mine called Jeffrey Martin, and he's spent about 25 years now gathering awakening accounts. And initially, he would sit down with people in their living room or in their office and interview them for 4 hours or more. And then he developed a whole profile of the awakening process. And obviously, he was getting people there from all different walks of life, all religions, all philosophical backgrounds, all cultures. And so I'm thinking in terms of applying what you say to the fastest way to progress. And what he found in that is, it's called the Finders study. And I describe it in my books, my blogs. He has a book called The Finders. And what he discovered was that, as you're saying, any of these things, any of these methods was capable of moving the needle. But the people who made the fastest progress in their spiritual development were those that experimented and found one that worked particularly well for them, did it for a while until it stopped working for them, and found something else. Did that for a while, and then did it till it stopped working for them, then found something else. And so what we're discovering, and again, we're building up a profile of this scientifically in terms of research, MRI, EEG studies, behavioral studies, is that you want to, first of all, pick something and do it. That consistency is really important. Because if you've just done that, then you are starting the process and signaling the universe you're ready for transformation. And then you may say, maybe pick Kabbalism, just to pick one school, and you're in it, you're deep into it, and you're having amazing experiences, and you're seeing all kinds of remarkable results materially and spiritually and physically in your life. And then at a certain point, you start to find that you've tapped into all of the usefulness it has for you, and you then might switch and move to Buddhism for a while and do that, or to Taoism, or to one of the other approaches. And so at different phases of our unique human journey, you're going to find different practices speak to you really deeply, and those will change. And it's very difficult I know we have a course called The Short Path to Oneness, based on the teaching of Ramana Maharshi. And one of the developmental stages, there are 36 spiritual milestones in The Short Path to Oneness. And in one of them, you have to give up your spiritual practice. I remember one of the students in the course was like, he was terrified. He just basically quit for months. He said, I can't get my spiritual practice. I used to be depressed and a drug addict. Only my spiritual practice saved me 17 years ago. No way I'm going to give it up. And yet we have to give up our most precious possessions, because if we don't, there is some element of grace that isn't able to reach us, or some personality structure that can't be reformed because we're clinging to some element of the old self, which, even though it's a very elevated self, is a limited self. And so you're going to have to give up every single part of who you think you are. In Sufism, it's called the annihilation of the ego. And it sounds harsh and brutal and nihilistic and terrifying, that I have to give up my entire ego. But what the masters teach is that if there's any part of you that's clinging, that eventually becomes an obstacle, even if it's clinging to being a wonderful person. or clinging to your favorite spiritual practice. And until you do that, until you let go of all your clinging, you aren't fully surrendered. And it's that full surrender that you're fully open to grace, and the radical transformation happens. And then in Patanjali's scheme of things, you move from lower samadhi into upper samadhi, and full surrender, full union. And there's a lot of writing in the Yoga Sutras about what that looks like and what that is. But I think the takeaway here from what you're saying is, have a practice, stick with your practice, be open to new things, be open to letting go of everything you may have held dear, even the things you think have really helped you in the past. And then by doing that, you open yourself to grace. When grace hits you, it's like being struck by a freight train. I mean, when that grace descends and that energy floods through your being, it rips away any remaining shreds of who you think you are, and it just wipes them out. And after that, you are, now you may still, as you mentioned, still go and watch the same TV series you watched before. You may still enjoy the same brand of beer you enjoyed before. You may still, on the outside, as the old Buddhist saying goes, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. You may still do all of those things. And yet, all you're doing with your personality is picking it up enough shards of it to function. Like, I know when I go to a social situation, like my wife and I were buying a house last year, and we went out to see the house in the morning after I meditated, and I forgot to ground myself. And so I stood there in the house, just totally out there in non-duality, and I couldn't speak. I just stood there, like, looking around me with absolute wonder at the house. And eventually my wife said, "Hey, Dawson, you got to come back and ground yourself, because the real estate agent and all the people around you think you're totally, you look really weird. So you have to go pick up a personality. You have to pick up your kids from school." One of the challenges we find in people when they hit these elevated states of samadhi is they become very forgetful, and they don't show up for dentist's appointments. They don't show up for work, and they just totally forget. They forget all kinds of things, that those things seem so insignificant to them compared to living in consciousness, that they aren't very good at moving into engagement with their lives. So like every one of my eco meditation tracks ends with grounding. Ground yourself through your feet, ground yourself to the earth, ground yourself energetically to time and space, and so you can function and be that effective human being. But that's just what I would recommend. How people apply this is follow the practice, follow it till it's, while it does things for you. When it isn't working for you, find something else. Be open, be surrendered, and you're going to find as you do this that when you totally trust the universe is just so full of love. Some days I sit there in meditation, I just cry, because there's so much love, there's so much joy, there's so much grace that just floods around me. I don't know what to do with it. My body can hardly even hold it. And I just find myself weeping with gratitude, just getting to take a breath. So again, you want to be that 1/5 of people who's moving into these elevated states, living in the world, same world as everyone else, but entering these states deliberately every day, and then seeing it affect not just your inner world, but your outer world in time as well.
Yeah, you made a really good point, because within Taoism we have a practice which is like a specific dissolving of all things. You lose everything, and then you regain it 10 times over. So I've got students that have been with me 20 years that are like, when I thought the energy couldn't get any stronger, it gets even stronger. My idea of what I perceive as the heightened state of all things, it keeps going up. And so within a hypnotist sort of like processes, it's like taking someone in and out of a trance, taking them even deeper. This is a processes that takes place. Now, you can use the method that you just spoke of, where, hey, I'm on one path, let me go to another, because I'm not getting anything out of this. It's run its course, and that would present itself as an expression of the honeymoon is over. That doesn't exist within Taoism. The honeymoon is never over. Your present moment can be replicated for eternity because you are abundant, timeless, endless, limitless, infinite. And so you kind of look at this stuff and you go, people go, oh, Buddhism and Taoism are the same. I'm like, whoa, easy, Sparky. Buddhism is like a pile of dirt covered in diamonds. You go looking, taking another diamond off, looking for more dirt. I want to take the dukkha, as my dear Buddhist friend would say. I'm observing dukkha, and I want to release more dukkha. My observation, my journey in this lifetime is to get rid of all the dukkha, and that's it. I don't really care about this avatar. Let it come and go. I'm on to my next experience. A Taoist is about immortality. A Taoist is about riding this avatar in this lifetime as long as possible. So the longevity aspect is critical. Once you harness the 50 trillion cells, you are the master keeper creator of that. And so you now move that alchemical process. That's why I say we second to none when it comes to this, because you're able to capture that. So you go from nothing to all things. And this is an amplitude that takes normally a cyclical cycle that comes in 9 days, 9 weeks, 9 months, and you'll experience nothing. You'll go from I am high as a kite, I am levitating things, I'm manifesting, I'm healing, I'm doing all this stuff, and then it's just gone. But it's a reset. And so when you reset, then you come back to the game, and it literally only takes a few minutes, normally within those type of scope of 9 seconds, 9 minutes, 9 days. There is a, depending upon where your own level of consciousness is. And then when you come back and jump back on the bull, you have an amplitude of that experience times. So I agree with you, but there's that mastery. And you know, I'm not familiar with other practices that have that sort of like dialing effect that comes with it, but it makes sense from the aspect of, hey, you've run this course, it's not bearing fruit no more. I got to move on. I got to find something else that's going to give me the same type of juice that I had when I first entered into this, as a surrender, as a all things. But I mean, that again comes down to an admission of surrender being limited, because that's a psychological processes. There is no, if you're abundant, timeless, endless, limitless, infinite, that you are all things. You're this present moment. This is where the juice happens. This is where everything happens at once. That oneness, the Tao, the mother of all things, is happening now. So this is where I kind of get a little, not conflicted, but I notice these sort of intricacies with other practices, and that everyone has its purpose and place. The most important thing is the amplitude must continue, and you will feel what you would perceive as a contraction, but it's just expanding to an even greater state. And that's where we have this moment. Does that make sense?
It does. And one of the questions I asked in Bliss Brain was, is there an end point? Do we get to a state where we're there? We've just arrived. So, you know, and again, I filter everything I write about and talk about through the lens of neuroscience. So, well, I just approach that question with an open mind. Is there an ultimate state we get to? So I looked again for MRI research, and the people that were used in this particular study were Tibetan monks. And Tibetan monks begin, if you've done 10,000 hours of meditation. Now, again, most of us will never do 10,000 hours of meditation in our lifetime. Some of these Tibetan monks have done 10,000 hours before the age of 15. And by the time they're 30, they may have done 25,000 or 35,000 hours. So I looked at MRI research, and I found one obscure study which looked at Tibetan monks who had done an average of 40,000 hours of meditation, and the way their brains were firing. It's like, whoa. I mean, the way, and again, these brains are extraordinary. They're often a decade younger than the monks' chronological age. They're very, very young brains in terms of cortical function and cognitive decline. And they're working in all kinds of amazing ways. I mean, the amygdala, the brain's fire alarm, the center of the stress response, shrinks. The nucleus accumbens, which has to do with cravings, shrinks. Other parts of the brain expand, memory and learning expand, physical sense control expands, emotion regulation. You mentioned emotion regulation being central, the central practice. And that part of the brain that regulates the emotions is called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And that tissue in these monks is massive. They have massive amounts of neural material for emotion regulation. But this study looked at monks with 40,000 hours and found a small group of monks who had an average of 63,000 hours of meditation. Now, this is a number that we can't even imagine in the West. These are people who went into the monastery usually at 4 or 5 years old and been meditating basically as their profession for decades. So that was my big question. Is there an end point? Do we get to a point where we're just so ecstatic there's nowhere to go? We can't get any higher. And I use those 40,000 hour monks as my baseline. Well, guess what? Between 40,000 hours and 63,000 hours, the brain kept changing. Gamma kept increasing. The amygdala shrank more. The nucleus accumbens shrank more. The emotion regulation circuit grew. The attention circuit was still growing. The circuit that regulates your sense of self, and the self again is the miserable suffering self, and that is that part of the brain is the mid prefrontal cortex that builds that. That kept getting darker and smaller in these advanced monks. So the answer is there is no end point.
Amen to that, brother. I mean, I knew that from my own teachers telling me that. And I mean, we have these evidence-based experiences where I have, students that have PhDs, they're, scientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, whatever. And one of them came to me and he had a research paper for some university he was working for. He's like, Jifu, you're not going to believe. I just got this latest project and I had to look into the nucleus of a human cell. You wouldn't believe what I found. I'm like, please tell me. Anyway, he's been training in this stuff with me for many decades, and it never ends. And so what happened was there's a practices within Taoism where we for the middle Dantian activation, which evokes what we call the sacred infinite flower, which is also evoked within the upper Dantian. It's what we call the observing of the death of a star, the rising of the red phoenix, and the accessing of black hole energy. And people are like, oh, that sounds ominous. No. When you start looking at quantum physics, there's interesting theories that are coming out that are paralleling this very understanding. Now, we've been doing this for thousands of years. We OGs at this. Now, he understands that. He taps into that frequency and that resonance and uses it to heal himself, manifest a new girlfriend, $1 million, whatever it is that he uses it for, understanding that state's there. But he came and he goes, Jifu, guess what I found in the cell, the nucleus of a human cell? I'm like, tell me. Black hole energy. I'm like, oh, what? That's strange. I didn't need you to research that for me, but that's really remarkable, isn't it? I don't have words. I'm just blown away. I don't have any. But this is the experiential evidence-based stuff where I really enjoy this new language of science and quantum, because it's the parallels. Because you get the feeling, you get the knowing, you get the evidence within your own journey, and then there's this it will never stop getting greater and greater. Like, a lot of people talk about out of body and they go, okay, well, I had this sleep paralysis. I had a near-death experience. Normally the near-deathers, they become addicts. They got the hit of the spiritual crack pipe and they've just gone, oh my goodness, man, I had the near-death and I see the angels, I see it all. And I'm like, this is awesome. Now you've got a foundation of what you're perceiving, what is being given to you with your processes, with your past lives, with your journey as the state that you're in of consciousness that is presenting itself to you in this framework. Is that the same for everyone? No. So when I go out into this frame beyond what you call this realm, and if we want to talk about quantum and start going dimensional shifts. You always go from 3 to 5. You just dismiss the time and space thing. Yeah, it's overrated a little bit, whatever. Fourth dimension, sure, let's go there. When you start getting out there is this incredible amplitude, and I've come across quite a few people that have had a similar experience. Now, then there's many other experiences, but I get into this threshold that goes beyond what is consciously perceived as, this electromagnetic spectrum and the universe, and we go into phosphorus white light, and then complete void and darkness. And between those two, you can go off into offsprings into any scenario that you choose to, in any multitudes, which is where the Nigong practice comes in, the Nidan practice, where you can operate in all dimensions at once, which would be self-evident. Like, hey, I've got my personality, but I want to manifest something that's going on in this 3D reality. That is impossible if I'm allowing my emotions to control me. Well, that's the sidetrack where people think that, but you get someone that's mastered, where I've got consciously 30 years in the game, but I do this right now. I'm in the universe. While we're talking, I'm experiencing all the subtleties of the visceral experience of moving through the sun, the stars, the earth. I'm having what they would call an astral projection, an out-of-body experience. And it's a mastery, because within Taoism, we call it spirit projection. So you would apply it within a martial form, where you're using Tai Chi, Bagua, and you've already created a scenario where you're engaged with the other person's energetic body. And so for all intents and purposes, you can be the puppeteer. The more attention someone gives you, you enter their physical body and you puppeteer their physicality using the magnetic fluidity that is your pure source. Now, we got different layers. But in essence, amen, I agree with you 1,000,000%. And there's no end to the development and potential of what is possible. And I would say to this, hitting, between 100 and 400 hertz then gives me this interesting question, because there's this guy, oh my God, what's that? Stephen Hawkins has this spectrum that he supposedly measured, which it's a little problematic for me. A lot of people bring it, see, Shifu, are you at 963 hertz? Is this it? Listen, I can see a physical healing at 100 hertz. I'll witness it. When you are gamma, I need the audience to understand, that means you envelop your whole brain. That means you can go down and play with alpha, theta, delta, epsilon at the same time as you're in gamma. That means that you got issues, whatever they are, you'll erase them like this. Just wipe them off. And you can consciously do that. This is this conscious part. So with that spectrum, I think it's a little problematic, because it sort of gives people an impression they have to work towards something that is the now. The present moment is that chi that I'm speaking of, that is not measurable, that doesn't have a frequency, but it's still, it's palpable. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, some of it is measurable, and science takes a while to measure phenomena. We notice them initially experientially, and so, for example, there were a lot of accounts of energy healing early on, but there was no explanatory framework for them, and so they were dismissed in academic circles because there was no way to explain them. And then we began to discover these fields. But it's hard to believe now. But for example, the German doctor who developed the EEG, Hans Berger, was just absolutely criticized by other people in the neuroscience field, other doctors, other researchers, and he faced such opposition to his discovery of brain waves. These our brains could be electromagnetic. It was just outlandish to the medicine of the 1930s. Eventually, he committed suicide in despair. So electromagnetism was regarded very suspiciously by medicine in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we tend to react. I mean, the MRI, again, we use MRIs and CAT scans and SPECT scans and things like that all the time. When those were introduced, they were regarded as being complete snake oil. Look at the history of the MRI, the CAT scan. Took decades for them to become accepted diagnostic tools. So we human beings have this very, very limited lens through which we see energy and healing. And it takes science a while to measure these things and to quantify them. But experientially, these ancient traditions have been talking about them for thousands of years, and not only talking about them, but showing us how to move ourselves into these elevated states in which they're possible. And I enjoy listening to the modern, the new teachers in our generation, especially some of the young ones in their 20s and 30s, who are having spiritual experiences and explaining their spiritual systems. But just personally for me, I tend to go for the ancient masters, because these ancient traditions are based on thousands of years of tradition. Like, the Yoga Sutras, which I mentioned, is that scripture was written down over 2,000 years ago. The oral tradition goes back several thousand more years, and this is thousands of spiritual masters, and they really refined their techniques. Are they easy for the modern lay person to understand? No, they're not. You usually need a living tradition, a master, an expert teacher to explain them to you and help you attain those states. But and again, I'm not in any way saying don't go to one of the modern masters who's had that elevated experience. They may have a lot to offer you, but just in my personal experience, I go read things that are several thousand years old and look for my answers to the experiential part there. Science is a measurement tool. We can then go measure gene expression, cortisol levels, immunoglobulins. We can measure blood pressure, heart rate variability, all of these things. And that's what, now, again, what that shows, what those measurements show us is that these ancient practices are having profound changes in your things like gene expression. In one study that a colleague of mine did, EFT acupressure tapping, just tapping on acupressure points for psychological trauma, 72 genes changed in an hour, changed the expression of 72 genes in 1 hour of treatment with an energy therapy. So we measure the effects of these ancient techniques that way with scientific tools. And what science is going to be doing in the next 50 years is mapping brain regions. Like in my book, Bliss Brain, I list the 4 components, the 4 networks, which together make up the brain's enlightenment circuit. And everybody has them. Everyone has the attention circuit, the compassion circuit, the self-control circuit. And so if you just turn those circuits on, then you're sparking brain change. We can now measure these circuits. We can also refine our methods for helping people get there really, really quickly once we have that measurement. But these techniques are ancient. And when you bring together where we are now is in this golden age where we have all of the ancient techniques and we have science to view them through the lens and say, this is what's most effective in those old techniques. And that's why we're seeing people awakening by the millions now. Again, that 20-fold increase in meditators in the last 40 years, and they're changing their brains. I mean, no species in history and evolution has ever had the power. Your dog, your cat, your mouse, your horse, no other species can literally change the anatomy and functional connectivity of its brain, let alone in 30 days, which we can do. And we now have a huge percentage of the human race doing just that. And that's why we see compassion. We see the number of nonprofits in the world growing 5-fold in the last 50 years. There are 5 times as many nonprofit organizations now as there were 50 years ago. We see all these compassionate initiatives. We see all these big social changes for the good. There are dramatic changes happening for the good in the world. They're underreported, but they're there. And this is catalyzing transformation globally in society and eventually across the planet. So we're talking about this as an individual experience. Ultimately, the results of your practice extend far beyond you, and you have no idea how influential you might be. And studies of what's called emotional contagion show us that as you become kinder, more compassionate, more peaceful, you affect your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor's neighbor, who you don't even know. They are affected by the quality of your emotional and spiritual experience. So we're doing it for ourselves, and we're changing the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, you want the evidence-based stuff. I mean, it really, and it comes from your state, right? So it initially starts with, as you master the emotional state that you're in, you can see things completely clearly. Like, if you don't believe us, put your hand in a door frame, close it, and see whether you can think straight. You're not, you're going to be reactionary. You're going to have a rippling effect of what takes place. And so it's like that scene out of, Oliver Twist. Can I have some more, sir? More? You want more? Yeah. I mean, you're literally, the universe doesn't have a moral compass. So this is sort of where the humanist can be distracted. You want to be able to resonate, because I've come across people that are highly evolved healers, but quite frankly, between you and me, they're complete. And so there's a level where there's the energetic aspect of it, but then this higher resonance can potentially, well, I'm not going to say, but it's still, you can resonate at a very high state and access this state without having the greatest, I am the Dalai Lama, I am light, I am all these things. So if we sort of water it down to your ability to identify everything as energy, everything that is energy has a vibration, that vibration has a frequency, that frequency has a resonance. If you're able to obtain that resonance, you will see a result. And this is where a lot of these new age mentors and manifestor teachers go, yeah, if you resonate, you want the money, resonate there. And what happens is there's a fundamental separation that they're teaching people, and that's why it's not actually applied. It's kind of like looking at sort of like The Secret. And why The Secret didn't work for so many people was they asked you for your values. That's not part of the equation. If I am the present moment and I want to witness a healing, I don't go, hey, universe, can you help me out? I'm not asking myself that. This is not a dialogue. It's a monologue. It's like, in the second you understand that, the present moment will be realized and you will see it. What's an example? I get this all the time, having so many kids. They run around, they do things, they hurt themselves. One of them eats the dirt and they get up with a huge swollen lip and they're like, Daddy, I hurt myself. And it's like, present moment, brothers and sisters come around, boom, you will witness that tissue result and go back to its default in a couple of seconds. I mean, that type of trauma is not really dramatic. Now, even cancer I've seen just disappear. It's like, that's part of the training, right? So tumors or cysts are great ones to watch, the physical stuff, but the internal stuff, and then you measure it by getting the blood work, getting the snapshot, getting whatever, you'll see it. And so within this type of mastery, you use sound as a resonance, somatic sort of like synchronicity that takes place with words and sound, that you generate a result. That resonance is there. And that's from ancient practices. That's what I get so excited when you go, you know what? I'm about the OGs, because I tell people, it's like you're driving down the highway in the rain. You're not going to drive off on another lane if you're behind someone else that's already breaking the separation of the water and the oil that could potentially be problematic with the slick. You drive in the groove of what they've already driven in so that you can sustain a stability. That goes with all these ancient practices. I mean, these have been, for me, they're thousands and thousands, tens. I'm from my teachers, tens, hundreds of thousands of years. People are like, that's ridiculous. There's only known that's been logged that it's 6,000 BC for any sort of Chinese culture, and that comes in the form of pictographs and oracle bone reading. Goes way beyond that. I mean, data shows that the physicality of this construct that we have possession of is the DNA expression of that is 200,000 years old. It hasn't been altered. So I worked that one out. there's a lot of data that's going around that can be problematic, and it can be validated by you. You don't need someone to go, you know what, I'm telling you now. And that, I think that's where you're so incredibly mastered at being able to integrate this, because I get a lot of neuroscientists and scientists, like a neurologist. Hey, you can't feel your third eye. Oh, damn straight I can. Oh, it's not sympathetically innervated. You can't feel that. Oh, yeah, I can. I'll give you an experience where you can feel the energy. Once you access the energy, you can feel any part of your body that technically on paper, there's no nerve endings there. You can't feel that. That's a solid organ. It's not sympathetically innervated. You can't feel your heart, your kidneys, your liver. Sorry, bro. I hate to break it to you, but once you access that state of awareness, the energetic, it's not a figment of your imagination. It will come out in an actual alteration at a subatomic particle level, and you can measure it. This is where I would love, that's what I love, is like the scientific measurable stuff. And there's a new thing that they call the kernel, which it I think uses infrared to measure blood flow, not the brain waves from an electromagnetic perspective, but you put it on. There's a guy by the name of Brian Johnson who's known within a lot of the social media community. I spent $2 million to extend my life, and I've reversed aging and all this kind of stuff. He started a company called Kernel that measures the brain using this new technology, which is not really new, but hey, look, whatever. It's another way to slice the apple. And so, you know, I mean, we are on the forefront of profound things, and it just comes with evidence-based looking around. I mean, I even had a friend of the channel, Alexis from Ascension Diaries, who talks about, she reads the Schumann resonance. So that's something that I, you know, is parallel with this. If we are all one, one is all, and you are the universe, then you would understand that the magnetism from the heart transmits 5,000 times more powerful than what's coming out of your brain. And so this is really the epicenter. And then you parallel that to the earth and what's going on with that magnetic field. And then there's this incredible increase. And, you know, my teachers, Lasso, has said that there's going to be an amplitude of increase. There's not, unfortunately, the death, destruction, and rinse, wash, repeat syndrome that seems to be fear-based. Unfortunately, people are like, yeah, what's going to happen? I'm like, I'm really sorry to disappoint you. Not much. Only more joy, more happiness, more bliss. Hang on. No, we're going to be in a world war. And we're doing, no, you're going to be surely mistaken. And they're like, dude, you're putting yourself out there. And I'm like, her evidence from reading the earth itself, the amplitude is going from 7.83 up to now. There's an interference, a natural interference that's taking place, or not a natural, an interference that's artificial, that's keeping people in the 12 to 18, which is, let's use the reference for all the people that Dawson knows what I'm talking about, high beta. It's like, oh, interesting how someone's interfering with that. And there's waves of high beta, which puts you myopic, hyper anxiety, fear. All these things present themselves. It's as if you have 5 cups of coffee. You can operate, but then it becomes problematic, because if you have all these variables within your physical body, your emotions, other things, that your environment, it can put you in a rat in a wheel. Why? And that word why will keep you not in the present moment of healing, but in the question, why me? Why my life? What is happening? Why God? Why am I? Everything is miserable. Yet what she can see is the brain, the wave is going into the 40 to 50 hertz for the next 1 to 2 years. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You get up there, and that would be evidence-based for what you're speaking of, with this raise of like not 1%, 4%, 20% of the earth right now is in a meditative state of awakening, a conscious collective, which would be representative and evidence-based to what you just said. I'm like, yeah, bring it on, man. More of the same. As Oliver Twist would say, can I have more, sir? You want more? Yes, I do. What is that? What do you think of that?
There's always more. And there are so many positive cultural pointers. So I end my book, Mind to Matter, and I have a second set of studies at the end of my book, Bliss Brain, just talking about all the positive trends there are in the world. And that 20-fold increase in meditators is one of them. There are so many others. And whenever I read a depressing story, I make sure I go and look at the facts empirically, what science is telling us. Like I was reading about a story about deforestation in the Amazon a few years back. And, it's a tragedy that there is all the slash and burn agriculture in the Amazon. So I went and looked at deforestation globally and reforestation globally. And it turns out that net, we are reforesting faster than we are deforesting. That the two biggest countries in the world by population, China and India, have dramatically reforested in the last 20 years. That's just one little fact of, like, I looked at it through about 400 studies to pick a dozen for each book. And there are so many indicators of human thriving and also of biological thriving. Like my wife was all worried watching a documentary about polar bears and the shrinking ice caps. And it's definitely a problem that habitat for polar bears is contracting with global warming and the disappearance of polar ice. But the count of polar bears began in 1950. And what we look at as we look at the count of the number of polar bears in the world since 1950, we find that it's been increasing, and there are now about 5 times as many polar bears in the world as there were in 1950. So the population has actually expanded dramatically since then. Just coral bleaching, global. I mean, it's every single thing you look at. Now, again, there's tons of bad news, but when you look at that bad news, go find the good news. Look at that larger perspective, and you'll start to that worry and that bad news comes from that frequency you mentioned of beta, and beta is the brainwave of panic and anxiety, conscious thought, trying to figure it all out with your mind. Go look at some of the research on all of the wonderful things happening in the world, the kindness, the compassion that is being shown all over the world, and that is not in no way meant to belittle the seriousness of these problems that we're facing as humankind. But as we have 20-fold increase in people who are in gamma, who are creative, who are resilient, who are happy, that effect spreads out throughout the whole world. They have inventions. Then they invent things that are effective at carbon capture. They invent things that are effective at reef rebuilding. There are all these initiatives going on to address global problems, and they're really remarkable and transformative. So we are, with our inner evolution, able to make a big difference in outer evolution. And I believe that the world my grandchildren inhabit, I have a whole bunch of grandchildren, a veritable tribe of them, but I think that the world that they will be in will be dramatically better than the one I was born into in the 1950s. So, well, the trends are positive. We do our work. It spreads out around us and really starts to move the needle in terms of these big global problems.
Amen to that, brother. I think this conversation today has been so refreshing and enlightening and connecting the conscious collective, and a good evidence base of communicating and having people realize that you speak my language, I speak yours. It can be universal and it can be integrated. And the more you explore, the more you observe, the more you will realize. And it starts with something, a method of something that I think is really a big message here today is find your path and start getting into a replicable cultivational processes that can be evidence to you on a daily basis of your own journey. Because what we're speaking of is not the physicality. That's very limited. So when you go and get into, exercise, food, whatever, it's transitory. You will not hold that line. Whereas this is different. This is on a different plane of consciousness. And when you say consciousness, all things. And so the energetic stuff has it's different. So you will have the ability to level up and continue to level up, and it doesn't leave you. You can leave this stuff. And I always tell people, it's like, oh, I didn't get a chance to do it for 2 days. And when I went back to it, it was 10 times more powerful. That's what happens. It's not the same as the physicality. So I want to end our incredible conversation with, I want to put all your social media, everything under this podcast. I also want people to go out and find you. What is it that you're offering the audience today? Do you have any sort of like systems, methods? I know you're a well-versed, world-renowned author. What are some of the things that you can offer the audience to help them in their own exploration?
Yeah, there are a lot of practical things that we have on our website, and we have a massive website that you can just explore. And if you go to the website Dawson, just my name, DAWSON, Dawson Gift, GIFT.com, I recommend you start there because we have the instructions for that acupressure tapping routine that we find essential for stress reduction. And we also have a free meditation track, the one that was shown to shift brain function in a month. So we have the meditation free there and the instructions for the acupressure there. Through that, you can find our certified practitioners. We have about 1,000 people who've been trained over the last 20 years. We're certified in these methods. We have classes. I teach in-person classes, Zoom classes. We have certified trainers. We have a lot of mini courses, like little short 10-day, 10 minutes a day classes on insomnia, anxiety, relationships, weight loss, all kind of applying these evidence-based methods to these really real problems. So just go to dawsongift.com, download the manual, look at the meditation, download that as well. Use it for 30 days. That's what I ask you to do. And then see how things start to shift for you. So that dawsongift.com is a good portal into all of those other resources.
I want everyone to go out there and check it out. My students, the OGs, all the people watching this, go and check out the offerings that Dawson's offering you right now. And in closing, I want to ask you one question. What's your definition of consciousness?
My definition of consciousness is just the ordinary one of being awake, being aware, knowing that we're here. And we are here and awake and aware in a way in which, you know, a lizard is not, a dog is not. So throughout nature, we find consciousness, but human beings are able to participate in consciousness in a way in which very few life forms we know of can. And so it's just the ordinary sense of being conscious and then developing that ability to merge our local consciousness, our local sense of I am, with infinite consciousness, non-local, the great I am. And we have that privilege to every day sit in meditation, let go of our little local awareness of self and be one with the infinite. And that experience will change everything.
That was beautiful. I've never heard the same answer for consciousness, and I think that was absolutely poetic and beautiful. I want to thank you for sharing your time with us today. I'm very, very grateful for you to come on the podcast. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. And I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you on the next one, guys.